Well, hey there and welcome back for another Secondhand Opinions video. I'm Jason Halderman, the internet's favorite fat mouth, fat ass, bringing you fat stacks of fuck facts. And, the leftists and the Democrats, they sure do keep pushing for their revisionist history, don't they? Just go over here to Fox News and take a look. Jim Jordan, Comer, demand D.C. mayor immediately suspend proposal to rename, relocate, or remove monuments in Capitol. Exclusive. House Republicans on Friday demand that Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser immediately suspend the radical proposal from a city organization to rename, relocate, or potentially remove monuments in the nation's capital. The District of Columbia Facilities and Commemorative Expressions, D.C. Faces, working group created by Bowser, issued a report last month recommending that the D.C. government make changes to D.C.'s historic monuments and memorials to reflect contemporary D.C. values. In a letter to Bowser on Friday, first obtained by Fox News, the top Republican on the House Judiciary Committee, Representative Jim Jordan, Republican Ohio, kicking butt Jim, and the top Republican on the House Oversight Committee, Representative James Comer, Republican Kentucky, good to see you're doing good work too, sir, said they were shocked and appalled that Washington, D.C., the seat of our government, for our great nation, and named for our first president, would seek to erase the legacy of our nation's founders and trivialize their contribution to the American experiment. You must immediately suspend this dangerous attempt at revising American history and desecrating the memory of our nation's presidents, war heroes, and visionaries, Jordan and Comer wrote. The two GOP lawmakers called the recommendations from the city panel radical. The working group wants the federal government to remove, relocate, or contextualize 8 different monuments and memorials located on federal property, they wrote. This absurd recommendation targets monuments and memorials for President George Washington, President Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and other American heroes. They added, these monuments are in place to represent American values and heritage, not simply to reflect your notion of contemporary D.C. values. Recommending their removal, relocation, or contextualization is nothing short of an attempt to rewrite the history of our country, they continued. In July, Bowser tasked the D.C. Faces Working Group with evaluating named D.C. government-owned facilities and make recommendations as to what, if any, actions need to be taken if the person the facility is named for is inconsistent with D.C. values and in some way encouraged the oppression of African Americans and other communities of color or contributed to our long history of systemic racism. Boy, that's a mouthful of bullshit and jargon, isn't it? Bowser tasked the working group with reviewing D.C. government-owned states, libraries, schools, recreational centers, parks, statues in D.C. government-owned parks, and other named public spaces. The working group, in its report, also recommended renaming nearly 24 public schools in D.C., named after prominent Americans including Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, 5 different U.S. presidents, Francis Scott Key, the author of the national anthem, amongst others. The working group report, commissioned at your behest, is a disappointing waste of taxpayer dollars, they wrote. The District of Columbia government is a creation of, and subordinate to, the United States Congress, and the district receives a significant portion of its budget from federal grants and federal payments. They added, the district is not merely a city in the United States, it is our nation's capital city, and it is held in trust by the federal government for the benefit of all Americans now and in the future. Jordan and Comer urged Bowser to refrain from wasting taxpayer dollars on misadventures and historical revisionism meant to placate the racial left-wing activists. The two went on to reference what they called left-wing violence and destruction in the streets amid months of protest and unrest in the city following the death of Minneapolis man George Floyd, who was black, in police custody in May. Was he Hispanic any other day of his life? Maybe he was white. No, I think Mr. Floyd was black his whole life, guys. That's a pretty stupid thing to write. The restoration of order to the district's streets should be your paramount concern, not rewriting American history to fit the left-wing political agenda, they wrote. In June, Bowser helped name the area north of the White House Black Lives Matter Plaza in remembrance of Floyd, but protesters graffitied the streets with the Defund the Police slogan, which has since been removed. President Trump over the summer warned protesters who damaged federal property that they could be arrested and imprisoned, and criticized state leaders for not being as tough on those who seek the destruction of historical monuments. The president also signed an executive order to protect American monuments, memorials, and statues, and threatened those who try to pull them down with long prison time. The order enforces laws prohibiting the desecration of public monuments, the vandalism of government property, and recent acts of violence, withholds federal support tied to public spaces and state and local governments that have failed to protect public monuments, and withdraws federal grants for jurisdictions and law enforcement agencies that fail to stop their desecration. It also provides assistance for protecting the federal statues. Well, there it is, boys and girls. If you had any question in your mind as to whether or not the leftists, the deep state cabal, Democrats want to separate your children from any sense of heritage or legacy or history, it's all right there. Let's all pretend like our opinions matter. Do them in the comments below. Remember, this is social media, so do all the things.